Possible selves. Possible selves theory was created by Hazel Marcus and Paula Nurius in 1986. Possible selves theory describes the importance and dynamics of self-relevant, future-oriented self-concepts, and how these self-view relates to motivation for current and future actions. Marcus and Nurius explained possible self theory by saying, possible selves are the ideal selves that we would very much like to become. They are also the selves that we could become and are afraid of becoming. The possible selves that are hoped for might include the successful self, the creative self, the rich self, the thin self, or the loved and admired self, whereas the dreaded possible selves could be the alone self, the depressed self, the incompetent self, the alcoholic self, the unemployed self, or the bag lady self. As you can see, possible selves are our own ideas of who we could become. This is not to be confused with these selves being who we will become. As stated in the quote on the previous slide, there are two kinds of possible selves, the ideal self and the feared or dreaded self. Ideal selves are what we would like to become. These are typically positive traits or aspirations. Some possible ideal selves might include becoming a more empathetic person, being successful in earning your degree, or establishing a family of your own. Feared selves are the things that we dread becoming. They are usually negative traits or characteristics. Some examples include becoming an alcoholic, becoming antisocial, or failing to succeed in the career you want. Along with the ideal self and the feared self, there is another type of self that actually overlaps these two categories. This overlapping self is known as the ought self, and is a type of self that people struggle with deeply. Ought selves can be a mixture of feared and ideal selves. Ought selves are the selves that others want or expect us to be. They are who we ought to be. Our ought selves are impressed upon us from many sources, including parents, teachers, friends, employers, up to society as a whole. Ought selves are often sources of great pressure or guilt, as they are everything we are expected to be. Letting go of our ought selves is a difficult task. Our personal narrative is how we experience and communicate our possible selves. The personal narrative is made up of our memories, thoughts, and our perceptions of ourselves and others. Our personal narrative is influenced by how others perceive us and how they treat us. For example, if a teacher treats a student who is struggling to read as if they are stupid and worthless, the student will begin to believe that they are stupid and worthless, even if it isn't true. Our personal narrative influences our self-concept. Self-concept is, at its simplest, how we answer the question, who am I? This answer can be simple and straightforward, like sibling, parent, student, or it can be more complicated, like traumatized person, victim, or neurodivergent. The self-schema is influenced by the self-concept. The self-schema is the belief about yourself that organizes and guides the processing of self-relevant information. Both self-schema and self-concepts are integral parts of our possible selves. So, what is it that possible selves do? Possible selves play a huge role in our motivation. Our ideal selves motivate us to create goals and work to achieve those goals in order to become the ideal self. That effect of possible selves is a positive one. However, the opposite is also true. Our possible selves can influence us in a negative way. If we create a narrow spectrum of what we believe we can become stuck in those narrow possible selves, unable to grow beyond them. In conclusion, our possible selves help us to determine who we want to be, who we want to avoid being, and how to get there. There is also a type of self, the ought self, that is who others expect us to be. Our possible selves are influenced by both our self-concepts and our self-schemas. Possible selves can be beneficial, but can also be detrimental to our growth if they are all we focus on.